Ja'Juan Seider has left for Notre Dame, but Penn State recruiting is still rolling. What's next for the Nittany Lions?
Locked On presents The Portal, the daily podcast covering college football recruiting and everything NIL. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back into the portal. I am your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football recruiting analyst and writer. Thank you for making the portal your first listen each and every day. Today's show is about Penn State. They just lost who I consider to be the number one recruiter in the country, Ja'Juan Seider. He's going to Notre Dame. But Penn State's recruiting has been tremendous for a long time under Coach Franklin. And quite frankly, I don't think it's really going to drop off that much. And to discuss all things Penn State, Zach Seyko of Locked On Nittany Lions. Thank you very much for joining the show, Zach. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing very well. Under the circumstances, right? Not the greatest timing, and this is a big deal.
Well, let's just start there. Seider is an elite recruiter. I've said it many times on your show when I visited yours, and that's great. But Penn State, it's not the hardest school to recruit to say it mildly, because it's got a lot of tradition. It's the only prominent program truly on the East Coast in any shape or form. No offense to Syracuse or Rutgers, but Maryland, it is what it is. So they have a lot of land to hit that they're the most prominent program and close. What do you think this is going to do to Penn State short-term, long-term? Who picks up the pieces on the staff? Have at it.
So short term, if we're talking about Nicholas Singleton, Gametime Allen, I don't think there should be any fear about losing the two co-starters. Now, don't get me wrong. Ja'Juan Seider played a hand in getting both of them to return for senior seasons. I mean, these guys, according to Mel Kiper Jr., whatever you think of the ESPN draft analyst, he had them respectively at 5 and 6. That's good enough for no later. And I know running backs getting drafted, it's different now in the modern age of football, but that's still a third round grade, maybe a second round grade if they, do well at the combine, do well at the pro day. So they were pretty set up to at least have a chance at being drafted relatively high. But the idea to come back and play for a national championship, Ja'Juan Seider certainly had to re-recruit them to, hey, this makes sense for both of you. And now he's out of the picture. So that's just an interesting detail and an interesting wrinkle to all of this. Am I overly concerned that they lose Cam Wallace or Quentin Martin or Corey Smith? More so than I am Singleton and Allen. I think those two are locked in because they're starters. Nothing changes. And then they would have to learn a new offense, a new system. And then speaking on behalf of Notre Dame, they don't really need running backs right now. But when I think about this, Jeremiah Love's going to go into the NFL draft with Singleton and Allen after this season for 2026. I don't know Aeneas Williams or Jadarian Price's timeline or anything like that, but at least the starting running back spot opens up. Ja'Juan Seider has strong relationships with Wallace, with Quentin Martin, Corey Smith. Those are all former high-profile recruits. Any of those guys, maybe they take a chance, go to Notre Dame, continue to learn, get acclimated, and then they get a chance to start for the Fighting Irish in a year's time. So there's a lot of, you really have to circle around and kind of justify that. It doesn't ultimately make too much sense. There's Tyke Hayes, there's Jabri Wallace-Coleman, right? But it's just still, Notre Dame set at running back. I'd understand if they needed a starter, needed some depth pieces, maybe, but they don't. They're pretty set.
Jeremiah Love's pretty good.
Yeah. And then long term, that's where it gets interesting. Class of 2026, you've talked about him. Messiah Mickens. Class of 2027, Keemon Spell. These guys are going to be conservatively top 10 at their positions. I'd even argue that Keemon Spell is probably going to be a top 50 overall recruit in the class of 2027, but that's so far out. However, Messiah Mickens has been pretty vocal on his social media. I try not to read too much into high school players and their posts to social media, but he's made it very clear that this move of Ja'Juan Seider going to Notre Dame has made him feel some type of way. He's only verbally committed. He just recently shut down his recruitment, but now Seider's over in South Bend. So he's saying that he's going to miss him, that God, he posted word for word, God guide me. So clearly, he's very faith-driven. We know Notre Dame's background, the institution, right? Who knows if that's going to play a role in all that. Notre Dame should definitely not want to pass on the likes of a Messiah Mickens or a Keemon Spell. I'll finish with this because it's very long-winded. But these two recruits, granted Penn State, they're both in-state in Pennsylvania, dominate the state. For those two specifically, Ja'Juan Seider is going to make a phone call. He's going to say, hey, what's the chance that I can get you to follow me to Notre Dame? Just because they're verbally committed to Penn State does not mean that Ja'Juan Seider is not going to try to get them to the Fighting Irish. And then overall, to answer your question, recruiting's, running back as good, as great, as elite as Ja'Juan Seider has been, Phil Trautwein is matching that level. Terry Smith and Anthony Poindexter, I'd argue secondary has been recruited just as thoroughly. It's almost a three-way race between the three of them. I know that Ja'Juan Seider is respected and I agree. I think he is one of the most elite recruiters in the entire country. But Phil Trautwein, Terry Smith, Anthony Poindexter for the secondary are not too far off. I think that Penn State really, they need to be able to solidify and get a running backs coach that's going to give them at least 3 years continuity, because that's what you're losing above all else. Someone who's been there for 7 years, and they make a lateral move to Notre Dame.
I think it's probably a change of scenery as much as anything else, because it's a lateral move in terms of they might have the two best running back stables in the country. I don't care which one you want to pick, 1A, 1B. I think Penn State's a little more top heavy, but Notre Dame's depth is really, really good. And he's not going to be lacking for talent in South Bend. So I get that. So maybe it's just a change in scenery. I don't know.
Pay raise. Notre Dame can certainly.
Oh, I'm sure there's no question about that.
They had to financially make it worth his while, because it is a lateral move. And what I don't understand is Ja'Juan Seider interviewed for the Florida Atlantic head coaching job. And from what I've gathered, he was a serious contender. So for him to make a lateral move, we know that here's the reason the reason he left Penn State was because there was no more upward mobility. Sure, a change of scenery, just something different. He's a Florida guy, right? To stay in state college for 7 years, his son graduated. He's no longer enrolled at the school anymore, not a part of the football team. That's when we all kind of assumed over here when he was going to leave, when his son was finished with football. But then he stuck around. So that's a testament to James Franklin to just kind of maximize Seider's availability at state college. There were rumors that he was linked to the potentially leaving to go to the Florida Gators. That was just something always to watch because he's a Florida guy. Then he interviews for Florida Atlantic. He's a serious contender, but doesn't get the job for the head coaching spot. And now he makes this lateral move. So I wonder what his upward trajectory is at Notre Dame. Talking to Locked On Irish, talking to Tyler, who does a great job over there. It seems like he's in the exact same situation of, are you going to eventually be an offensive coordinator? Because I can understand that maybe being subtly bitter. It's just that you haven't gotten a promotion in so long. You can add whatever title, but his responsibility didn't change. Your job is to develop running backs, go out and recruit, and nothing else. He wants to be something more. An offensive coordinator, because he interviewed for the offensive coordinator spot before Andy Kotelnicki was hired. He interviewed for the head coaching job at FAU. He clearly wants something more than just to be a running backs coach. So is it really a change of scenery? Is it really just getting a potential pay raise? Or is Notre Dame maybe offering him something that Penn State couldn't? And maybe that's a promotion in-house in 2-3 years' time. Who knows?
Notre Dame's OC, much like Penn State's, is one of the best in the country, and he's not going anywhere.
I know.
Maybe there was a disagreement, and I am 1,000,000% speculating here. There was a rift on the staff there had to be something, because there's no upward mobility at Notre Dame either. Now, I'm sure salary is important, but it's not like he's hurting either. So we'll see how that goes. When we come back, we're going to talk about Penn State did a great job in the 25 class. They're off to a fast start in 26, but who do they need to get? What's going on with in-state recruiting? We're going to talk about that next here on The Portal. After the holiday hustle, there's nothing like giving your home some tender, loving care, and I always find that decluttering and refreshing my space helps me get back into a routine. Whether you're tidying up, clearing out, or just want to give your space a new look to start off the new year, Wayfair has everything you need, all within your budget. I just actually bought a desk that I'm putting together in my front room for my new computer setup, and I got it for under 130 bucks on Wayfair, and it was delivered right to my door, no problem. That's why I like it. Cheap, and it's also very easy and convenient. So they have everything for you for what you need, and there's something for you, me, or anybody else that goes on to Wayfair to fix up their house or apartment or whatever they do. Make sure that you check out Wayfair. Give your home a refresh it needs with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's wayfair.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. All right, Mr. Seyko, we have the discussion points of 26. Penn State only signed 8 of their 27 players from the prior class from inside the Keystone State. That's pretty rare for them. They missed on a few kids. Well, they're certainly not starting off that way for the current recruiting plateau that they're headed towards. It's enormous because they're killing it in state. Give me 2 or 3 guys that they are really trying to get. Where do they stand with them? However you want to present it.
Well, Zion, Ellie, and Emmanuel Iheanacho are going to be the Grand Slams.
Right.
Let's throw that out there that Penn State at least has a chance. I don't think Ellie stays with Maryland. I really don't think he does at the end of the day. And Iheanacho has actually said, I think it was in a recent interview, that Penn State's one of his top schools. Now, he's been transparent saying that Oregon is the leader, but Penn State's right in the mix of it, even though he still has, a top 7, 8, 9, or 10, something like that. But at least Penn State is in the upper half of that top list of schools. So those are the recruits that Penn State is definitely going to try the hardest to maintain relationships with and ultimately land their commitment. Joey O'Brien. Brian, this is somebody that we've talked about for a long time. In-state safety, LaSalle High School, 6'4". I'm surprised that he has not verbally committed to Notre Dame for the longest time. I really thought that Penn State was more or less an afterthought, but it does remain interesting that he's still uncommitted. That he hasn't, because all signs for the most part at least indicated that Notre Dame's the favorite. So why not just make the decision? Well, I think Penn State's doing something about it. I think they're keeping this conversation, this debate a little intriguing here, but that's who I would definitely set. I would say that Penn State has their sights on as like highest priority. Owen Wafel. He is the older brother of Luke Wafel. And they were able to get Owen Wafel away from Michigan. Now, he was in the transfer portal, but that's a former Michigan defensive tackle. He committed to Penn State. Now he's developing. He's there for spring football and everything else. But Luke Wafel, his younger brother, defensive end, is going to be more important. The connections that, with Jim Knowles coming over from Ohio State has to St. Joe's Prep particularly, but just over in the Philadelphia, New Jersey area. And that's where Luke Wafel is from, that New Jersey area. So now his big brother's at Penn State. There's just better, stronger connections to that eastern part of Pennsylvania, New Jersey area. Those are the 4 names to really know about. They're really off to an exceptional start for 2026. I like this class. When you mentioned 2025 and how not enough kids from Pennsylvania ultimately committed, hey, what goes around comes around. It was a lot worse if you remember our conversations over the summer, because they were losing players left and right from the state of Pennsylvania, and then they go and get an Andrew Olish, then they go and get a Jabri Wallace-Coleman. So they really rebounded from nothing to at least get back on par. So I'm content with what they did for the class of 2025. 2026 could be at a minimum top 10 in the country overall.
Yeah, I think that would be disappointing with their start. If they get O'Brien, it'd be really hard not to finish the top 10. I think at that point, he's probably a national top 10 state. I mean, the rankings will fluctuate and all that. And how do you want to put him at one spot? He's a pretty good receiver too. So we'll figure that out later. But I agree. Looking at the 2026 class for the Nittany Lions, positionally, is there a spot where they need to load up, or they're a little behind, or they're going to have a big graduation year coming up? Anything like that?
Yeah, it's really, I like what they've already built. I mean, they have the foundation of, now this conversation could definitely change. I mentioned Messiah Mickens. He's the number 2 overall commit in this class of 2026. If he leaves at that running back spot, I mean, Penn State ideally always wants to get at least one, definitely. I'd say at least two. That's the goal, but they have the quarterback. For now, they have Messiah Mickens, the running back. They have these faces of the class of 2026, and Marcus Higgins is doing one heck of a job. He's got 3 wide receiver commits and somebody that people need to become familiar with. Jasir Rogers. Give or take, he's a fringe 3-star, according to most of the industry at this point. This guy is going to fly up the rankings. I kid you not. Rodgers is athletic as they get. This is somebody that it's been communicated to me that don't just read into the recruiting rankings. There's a reason Penn State takes these commitments. It's because the camps, the training camps, these opportunities to get to showcase your skills, the coaching staff does the tests. What is your more than just height and weight? What is your 40 time? What is your broad jump? What is your all these different measurables? And then these 7-on-7 camps that not every recruiting scout gets to go and see, but Penn State does, and Penn State does its homework, because if someone in the recruiting industry is wrong about a recruit, your job status doesn't change. But if you're at Penn State and you're evaluating talent and you miss, then yeah, your job might be on the line. So when I hear this positive intel, and it's more than just, positive intel, Jasir Rogers very well could be borderlining on an upper 4-star. I won't go as far to say 5-star because the competition that he plays currently in Delaware is pretty limited, but there's not a lot of complaints that I have about 2026. They have 3 wide receivers. Jasir Rogers seems to be that one of these eventual headline recruits to go along with Kevin Brown out of Harrisburg, Messiah Mickens, and then Troy Hune, who's a top 10 quarterback in the country out of the state of California.
Well, I think they've done a good job of doing early scouting. I've said it for a long time that I think the Penn State staff is probably as organized as anybody's. Maybe it doesn't end up working out that way long term. Now they've had a few guys change on their staff and this and that, but right now I have no reason to believe they won't just reload. Again, I know they lost Seider to Notre Dame, but it's one coach. And they've got several other guys, Poindexter, et cetera, that are really good coaches. Troutwine, they'll be fine. Mm-hmm. I'm really curious to see if they can steal somebody like Ely, Iheanacho, kids that I've met and been around. They're taking visits, but those guys are more down the road. This should be a top 10 class. Mm-hmm. And I really think that there's an opportunity for, how do I put this? Penn State to ascend, because they were just in the Final Four.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were really close to making the national title game. And above all else, they just looked the part. Like, it looks like, okay, this team's really close. I could be the one to kind of help get over the top. That's how I would try to sell it if I was James Franklin to an elite recruit, Iheanacho. Pick the guy you want. I think Penn State can do that. I don't really think Penn State's that far off from being, elite recruiting school too. Now the NIL stuff, we'll talk about that next, but I think Penn State could have a top 5 class, and we'll get into that because, where is Penn State recruiting and where is it heading? That's next here on the Portal. NIL has been a discussion point for every school and their fan base. You and I have talked about it with Penn State. They are not the most aggressive up front traditionally. Has that or has that not changed? Is that going to impact 26 recruiting? I'd imagine it will, at least a little bit, but I want to hear from what you've heard. Is Penn State a little more willing to pay some guys in some way, shape, or form? How the contracts are structured, by the way, changes person to person. That's a big deal. What have you heard, Zach?
Well, NIL is still, it's taboo, right? It's paying players, and I'm not saying so. Penn State's caught up, and I forget what outlet it was. Maybe it was The Athletic. I don't want to incorrectly attribute to what it was, but basically a major publication posted the top 10 schools in terms of revenue, which included NIL estimates. And Penn State was number 7. So Penn State has certainly caught up with the times in terms of, hey, this is how you have to compete. This is what you have to do. They are creating a front office like structure to at least just take some pressure off the coaching staff and trying to do the negotiations are going to be handled by a completely different department. And Pat Kraft, being the athletic director as he is just, he's not only catching Penn State up, but he's also putting Penn State in front of it. They're developing other programs to allow players, athletes across the board. This is more than just football, but to be able to maximize their NIL ability. Is Penn State going to do the things that SEC schools with a lot of money and maybe money that they don't know what to do with, or money that they think they have and they don't, Miami, allegedly, right? To be able to just flaunt and throw around, not necessarily, but revenue sharing certainly helps. Penn State is doing everything in its power to maximize itself as a brand. So I am confident that Penn State won't necessarily have NIL issues, but they're going to have to be straight. They're always, because Penn State is financially a top 10 school, they're always going to be at least a top 10 school. They're not going to be pushed around. They're not going to be financially bullied, if you will, by other institutions as much. Again, there are strong players, the schools in Texas, the schools in Florida, right? The ones that are notorious, but we saw Ohio State spend a lot of money. So just understand that Penn State certainly is not hurting for money, but it's how they allocate those funds is what will be interesting to see. And revenue sharing certainly levels the playing field at this point in time. But NIL is not going to go away. You have revenue sharing, which helps.
Collectives are still there, though.
NIL is going to be this bonus on top of it. So you still have to compete to an extent. At least Penn State has a base, has a foundation. And it's because they're just fortunate that they are a top 10 financial, they just generate top 10 revenue. They are just fortunate that that's what the football program and the university do. For Tulane and all these other schools that are just in the group of five, NCAA really, I'm seeing reports that the NCAA is going to dissolve, right? It's getting out of control.
Do you think Penn State is going to focus a little bit more on retention long-term than some other schools? Or do you think it's going to be at least a little bit more balanced towards the recruiting, or maybe the guy they want to get out of the portal?
So Penn State's going to do what Penn State's going to do. They are sticking to the success with honor mantra. You and I have debated that. Is it working for Penn State? Whether or not outsiders might say it's a bad idea, don't do it. You got to do what allegedly what Florida and Texas area schools are doing. Penn State's going to stick with this. They are going to go with success with honor, and they're going to do NIL the right way. So that means that, yes, they are going to focus on retention, and we've already seen that in real time. They brought back Drew Aller. They brought back Nicholas Singleton and Gametime Allen, Denai Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant, Zachy Wheatley. All of those guys should have gone into the NFL draft, and they didn't. They came back for a final season, and I got to imagine there were some financial incentives involved, because Denai Dennis Sutton could have been a second-round pick. Drew Aller could have been a first-round pick. That's not a hot take. That is on potential alone. Some franchise would have taken Drew Aller in the first round of the 2025 NFL draft, whether the internet comments agree with it or not. That's just a fact of the matter. So for Aller to sacrifice first-round money in 2025, it had to financially somewhat make sense for him to come back to Penn State. So Penn State is certainly focused on retention. They don't want to play free agency in the transfer portal. James Franklin has made that very apparent, that they are going to build through high school recruiting and keep a foundation, keep a base, and then go get complementary players in the transfer portal and not play free agency. That's just not how they want to do it. And then they want to follow the success with honor.
Well, that's fair. That's fair. I think that Penn State, they're one or two recruits away per season. Ely, Iheanacho, again, those are easy picks. O'Brien, if they get into a tough situation at the end where it's really torn between them and Oregon for Iheanacho, just hypothetical.
Right.
You're not going to, quote unquote, outbid Oregon. They have the greatest booster in the history of boosters. He owns Nike. I'll let you figure that one out.
Yeah, and Penn State's a Nike school too, so it's really interesting
ironic
there. Yeah.
It really is ironic. But you can be competitive. How they structure it, how do they make it work for each player? That's more important from the conversations that I've had with a lot of people than just the totality of the number. Some kids need certain things, need help with, the financial aspect of it, having the right financial advice. There's a lot of ways you can help the kids with the money they get. So I think Penn State will be just fine. Last question for you. Do you think they will get a spike in recruiting and or the portal for that matter? Because we got another portal window coming up after spring ball. For those who don't know, it's a 10-day window. Kids can get in after they have their spring practice. Do you think they will get a little bit of a boost because they were in the Final Four?
I mean, they should, and they're still kind of hurting at some positions. Obviously, wide receiver is going to come to mind.
100%. They need another guy,
So
definitely.
and they might lose some players along the way. I don't know for this. This is purely speculation. But when you are as deep as you are at running back, at offensive line, there just might be some natural attrition. I'll tell you what Penn State needs. Penn State needs wide receiver depth. Penn State needs defensive tackle depth. And they've been looking around for a linebacker the past few portal cycles, but it hasn't really materialized. Defensive back is really deep. Safety, cornerback. Jim Knowles runs a 4-2-5, which is great because then they have five. Then they have five defensive backs on the field. So there's definitely. So they already got a King Mack into the fold. I mentioned Owen Wafel, or so King Mack's that safety. He's going to factor into some starting time. So Penn State's already begun to solidify itself through the portal. Again, that's not the means that they want to go through. They'll go get some complementary players, guys that make sense, but they're not going to try to get into a bidding war for the player that's rated per On3 24/7 as the number one overall transfer portal prospect or whatever have you. They would rather focus that on Ely, Iheanacho, trying to, again, having prospects like a Troy Hune be happy, right? Troy Hune's coming from California. You mean to tell me that there is no incentive from NIL, right, to go all the way
100%.
across the country? And I'm not trying to imply that Troy Hune is doing it solely from the money, but it has to make it. Penn State is working from a completely, the way that Penn State wants to position itself is more than just being a big spender. They want to create this comprehensive experience where you get the education, you also get the personal finance education. That's what Penn State's really emphasizing. Going back to my point about how they create this initiative to basically turn athletes into pro business managers when all's said and done. You don't know if you're going to have athletics for the next 10, 15, 20 years. So why not basically pick up somewhat of a business minor just by being an athlete at Penn State? And I think that's where the success with honor comes into play, is that it's more about the comprehensive experience and learning how you can maximize your personal value while you're at Penn State, after you leave Penn State, more than just, hey, here's an upfront check. And I think that's more valuable at the end of the day than getting that upfront NIL check just to play football for 2, 3, 4 years because you have the portal. You have the portal.
There you go. Zach, I appreciate it as always, buddy. Tell everybody where they can find your work.
I appreciate it, Brian. Anytime we get to chat, and hopefully I can get you back on my show very soon. Locked On Nittany Lions, available on YouTube wherever you get your podcast. Recruiting's going to heat up very soon, just like the weather. So I'm very eager to have you back on the show to debate some, especially these commitments, because we are almost in recruiting season.
Absolutely. It will be here before you know it. A lot of big junior days coming up. I'm sure Penn State will have plenty of those as well in March, heading into the big recruiting season. You can find my show Locked On the Portal, YouTube. You can find it on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, just about anywhere you get your pods. You can find Locked On the Portal. Make sure you like, subscribe, share, and hit that notification bell. We will see you again on the Portal.